Dean found three men beating Sammy backstage. Sammy's face was covered in blood, his eyes swollen shut, and at that exact moment, Frank was on stage performing, 90 seconds from finishing. And if Frank found out, he'd kill all three men. Wait, because the decision Dean made in those 90 seconds didn't just save Sammy's life, it saved Frank's too. But when Frank found out what Dean had done, he never forgave him for the one thing Dean thought he was protecting him from. The Sands Hotel, Las Vegas, May 22nd, 1965. Saturday night, 11:45 p.m. Frank Sinatra was on stage performing the final song of his set, and Dean Martin was backstage walking toward his dressing room when he heard a sound that made his blood run cold. Not the sound itself. It was barely audible over the muffled music coming from the showroom, just a thud, followed by what might have been a gasp cut short. But Dean had spent enough time in rough places to know what violence sounded like when it was trying to stay quiet. He stopped walking. The corridor was empty. Just concrete walls painted beige, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the distant pulse of Frank's voice singing through the walls. Dean had maybe 20 feet between him and his dressing room, where a bottle of Jack and a comfortable chair were waiting. He could keep walking, pretend he hadn't heard anything, mind his business. But that wasn't who Dean was. Not really. Not when it mattered. He followed the sound to a storage room door, slightly ajar, a sliver of light cutting across the hallway floor. Dean approached quietly, years of instinct telling him to assess before acting. He pressed close to the doorframe and looked inside. Three men, one victim. The victim was Sammy Davis Jr., pressed against the far wall between two metal shelving units, his tuxedo jacket torn at the shoulder, his bow tie hanging loose. His right eye was already swelling, the skin around it darkening to purple. Blood trickled from his split lip down his chin. His hands were raised, palms out, trying to calm a situation that was already way past calming. The three men surrounding him were stage crew. Dean recognized the gray work shirts, the worn denim pants, the kind of guys who moved equipment and fixed lights and usually stayed invisible. But there was nothing invisible about them now. The biggest one had Sammy's collar bunched in his fist, holding him against the wall. The other two flanked him, fists clenched, waiting. "You think you're special?" The big one was saying, giving Sammy a shake that bounced his head off the concrete. "You think being Sinatra's pet makes you untouchable?" Sammy's voice came out strained. "I don't want trouble. Just let me go. You are trouble. You and that white wife of yours, acting like you belong here. You don't belong anywhere we are." Dean's hand went to the door, ready to push it open, ready to walk in and end this the way he'd ended the last time he'd found Sammy cornered by men who thought violence solved problems. Then he heard it. Frank's voice, coming through the walls from the showroom, crystal clear even at this distance, because Frank had a voice that could cut through concrete when he wanted it to. The final number. Frank's closing song. Dean knew this song. He'd heard Frank perform it 100 times. He knew every note, every pause, every moment Frank held for dramatic effect, and he knew exactly how long it lasted. 4 minutes, 35 seconds. Frank had started maybe a minute ago, which meant 3.5 minutes left, but Frank would take his bows, wave to the crowd, walk off stage. That added maybe another minute. Call it 4.5 minutes total before Frank came backstage. Dean looked at the storage room, looked at Sammy, blood on his lip, fear in his eyes, looked at the three men who were just getting started. Then Dean did the math that would haunt him for the rest of his life. If he walked into that room right now, there would be noise, shouting, maybe fighting, definitely commotion, and if Frank heard any kind of commotion backstage while he was performing, he'd walk off stage mid-song to check it out. Dean had seen him do it before. Frank didn't finish songs when his people were in trouble. He left audiences hanging and dealt with the problem. And if Frank walked off stage and found Sammy like this, found three men beating him in a storage room, Frank wouldn't call security. He wouldn't ask questions. He'd do what Frank always did when someone hurt his friends. He'd hurt them back, permanently. Dean had seen Frank's temper exactly twice in their friendship. Once in 1959, when a casino manager had refused to let Sammy perform because of his race. Frank had grabbed the man by the throat and told him if Sammy didn't perform, none of them would, and the casino would lose every headline act in Vegas by morning. The manager had backed down, but only because Frank had been surrounded by witnesses and lawyers. The second time had been worse. A reporter had written something cruel about Sammy's interracial marriage, something that crossed the line from criticism to hate. Frank had found the reporter in a bar, and what happened next had required Dean, Joey Bishop, and 3 security guards to pull Frank off before he killed the man. The reporter had spent 2 weeks in the hospital. Frank had spent 2 months dodging assault charges that only disappeared because the reporter was too scared to press them. That was Frank. Loyal to the death, literally. He'd die for his friends, and worse, he'd kill for them. And right now, if Frank walked into this storage room, he wouldn't stop at a beating. Not with Sammy's blood on the floor. Not with the racial slurs Dean could hear the men using. Frank would cross a line he couldn't uncross, and they'd all pay for it. Dean had maybe 90 seconds to decide. Option 1. Go in now, loud and fast. Get Sammy out. Deal with the 3 men. Risk Frank hearing. Risk Frank coming backstage. Risk Frank ending up in prison for murder. Option 2. Wait. Let Frank finish his song, take his bows, get off stage, then go in together. Safety in numbers. Frank's rage tempered by Dean's presence. Everything handled clean. But Sammy didn't have 90 seconds. The big man had just hit him again. A short, sharp punch to the ribs that made Sammy double over, gasping. Dean made his choice. He pushed the door open and walked in alone. His voice cut through the room, quiet and cold. Let him go. The 3 men turned. The big one didn't release Sammy's collar, just looked at Dean with the kind of contempt that said he wasn't impressed by a singer in a tuxedo. This is private, Mr. Martin. Keep walking. Dean stepped fully into the room and closed the door behind him, quietly. No slam, no noise, nothing that would carry to the showroom where Frank was hitting the bridge of my way. I said, let him go. Or what? You going to sing us to death? The other 2 laughed. They thought this was funny. They thought Dean was just an entertainer who'd fold the moment things got physical. Dean took 3 steps forward, moving with the kind of calm certainty that made the 2 younger men unconsciously step back. Only the big one held his ground. Last chance, Dean said, his voice barely above a whisper. Let go of him and walk out. Right now, no noise, no fuss, you just leave. Through the walls, Frank's voice hitting the final chorus. Frank was nearly done. Maybe 60 seconds left. The big man's face twisted into a sneer. You know who sent us, Martin. You know who wants him gone. Don't care. Let him go. Make me. Dean's right hand moved fast, locking around the big man's wrist, the one holding Sammy's collar. Dean squeezed. Hard. Decades of strength from golf and swimming compressed into 5 pounds of pressure on exactly the right nerve cluster. The big man's fingers opened reflexively. Sammy stumbled free. Dean kept his voice low, urgent. Sam, get out. Go to my dressing room. Lock the door. Don't come out until I get there. Sammy was staring at him, blood on his lip, confusion and pain in his eyes. Go. The urgency in Dean's voice cut through Sammy's shock. The big man tried to grab him. Dean twisted his wrist sharply, dropping the man to one knee. You're done with him. Now you deal with me. Sammy slipped out the door. Dean heard his footsteps in the corridor, quick and uneven, moving away. The big man stood up, rubbing his wrist, his face red with humiliation and rage. You just made a big mistake, Martin. Probably, but it's my mistake to make. Through the walls, Frank's voice holding the final note, That long, sustained climax that always brought the house down. 30 seconds, maybe less. Dean needed to end this fast and quiet. No broken bones, no screams, nothing that would bring Frank running. "Here's what happens now," Dean said, his voice still deadly quiet. "You three walk out that door. You leave this building, you don't come back, you don't talk about this, you don't tell whoever sent you what happened. You just disappear." The boxer type, the one who'd been bouncing on his feet earlier, he wasn't backing down. "And if we don't," Dean's face didn't change. Then when Frank Sinatra walks backstage in about 20 seconds and asks what happened to his friend, I tell him everything. Your names, who you work for, what you did, and then Frank does what Frank does. You know his reputation. You want to test it. The three men looked at each other. Dean could see the calculation happening, the risk assessment. They'd been sent here by someone with authority, someone who'd told them they were protected. But Frank Sinatra's rage was legendary. Nobody wanted to be the reason. Frank crossed a line. The one with red knuckles broke first. "We're leaving. Smart. Back door, now. Don't let me see you again." They filed out, the big man last, shooting Dean a look that promised this wasn't over. Dean didn't care. They were gone, and Sammy was safe, and Frank's song was ending. Dean stood alone in the storage room, breathing hard, his hands shaking slightly from adrenaline. Blood on the floor where Sammy had been standing. A torn piece of Sammy's jacket on the ground. Evidence everywhere of what had almost been much worse. Dean grabbed a rag from one of the shelves, wiped the blood off the floor, stuffed the rag and the torn fabric into a trash bin. Not perfect, but good enough. If anyone looked closely, they'd see something had happened here, but casual inspection would reveal nothing. From the showroom, applause, whistles, the sound of 3,000 people on their feet. Frank was done. Dean slipped out of the storage room, walked quickly down the corridor to his dressing room. Sammy was there, sitting on the couch, holding ice to his eye, his hands shaking. "Dean, what?" "Shh, listen to me. Frank can't know about this." Sammy stared at him. "What?" "If Frank knows, he'll kill them. Not rough them up, not teach them a lesson. Kill them. And then we're all done. Frank goes to prison, you and I are accessories. The Rat Pack is over. Everything we've built, gone. Dean, he deserves to know. He deserves to not throw his life away on 3 pieces of trash who aren't worth it. Sammy, please, trust me on this." Sammy touched his swollen eye, winced. "What do I tell him? Tell him you walked into a door. Tell him you tripped. Tell him anything, except 3 guys jumped you in a storage room. He won't believe." The door opened. Frank Sinatra walked in, riding high on the performance, bow tie loosened, smile on his face that died the instant he saw Sammy. "Jesus Christ. Sam, what happened to your face?" Sammy looked at Dean. Dean gave the smallest shake of his head. Sammy took a breath. "Walked into a door, Frank. Stupid, I know. Wasn't watching where I was going." Frank stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he examined Sammy's injuries, the swollen eye, the split lip, the blood on his collar. Dean could see Frank's mind working, could see the doubt forming. "You walked into a door." "Yeah." "Which door?" "The one to the storage room. I was cutting through, wasn't paying attention." Frank looked at Dean. "You believe this?" Dean kept his face neutral. "Sam's a klutz. You know that." Frank's eyes stayed on Dean's for a long moment. Dean had played poker with Frank 1,000 times. He knew Frank's tells, knew when Frank was bluffing, knew when Frank knew someone else was bluffing. And right now, Frank knew. But Frank also knew Dean. Knew that if Dean was lying, he had a reason. Knew that Dean didn't bullshit about important things. Frank turned back to Sammy. "You should get that looked at. Ice isn't enough. You might need stitches." "I'll be fine." "Sam." "Frank, I'm fine. Just a stupid accident. Let it go." The room went quiet. Frank looked between them, his jaw tight, his hands flexing at his sides. Dean could see him wrestling with it, wanting to push, wanting to know the truth, but also knowing that if they were lying to him, it was for a reason he might not want to hear. Finally, Frank nodded. Okay, but if that door bothers you again, you tell me. I will. Frank left. The door closed behind him. Dean and Sammy sat in silence for a long moment. Then Sammy said quietly, "He knows. Yeah, he's going to find out the truth eventually, probably. And when he does, he's going to be pissed at them and at us for lying." Dean poured himself a drink, his hands finally steady. "I'll take that risk if it keeps him out of prison. You think he'd really kill them?" Dean looked at Sammy, at the blood on his collar, the swelling around his eye. "For you, in a heartbeat." 3 days later, Frank found out. Dean never learned how. Maybe the three men talked. Maybe someone else had seen something. Maybe Frank just asked the right questions to the right people until the story came together. But on Tuesday night, Frank walked into Dean's dressing room with a face like stone. "You lied to me." Dean had been expecting this. "Yeah, 3 guys. Storage room. They beat Sammy and you didn't tell me." "That's right." Frank's voice was quiet, which was somehow worse than if he'd been yelling. "Why? Because you would have killed them." "Damn right I would have." "And then what? Prison? Trial? The end of everything we've built? For 3 guys who aren't worth it?" Frank took a step closer. "That's my decision to make, Dean, not yours. You weren't thinking clearly. I wasn't there. You made sure of that. You handled it yourself, and you lied to my face about it." Dean stood up. "I protected you. I don't need your protection. I need my friends to trust me. I trust you with my life, Frank. I don't trust you with theirs when you're that angry." The words hung in the air between them. Frank's face was flushed, his fists clenched. Dean stood his ground, knowing this could go either way. The dressing room door opened. Sammy walked in, took one look at them, and understood immediately what was happening. "Frank, stay out of this, Sam." "No." Sammy stepped between them, both hands raised. "Dean's right. If you'd been there, you would have hurt them. Badly. Maybe worse. They deserved exactly what they got. Dean threw them out. They're gone. It's over. But if you'd been there, it wouldn't be over. It'd be headlines and lawyers and cops, and we'd all be finished." Frank's eyes were bright with rage and something else, something that looked like hurt. "You both lied to me." "We protected you," Dean said. "Same thing." "No, Frank, it's not." Frank looked at Dean, then at Sammy, then back at Dean. His jaw worked, the muscles in his neck standing out, his whole body radiating fury barely held in check. "You had no right. I had every right. You're my friend. I'm not letting you throw your life away." Frank lunged forward, not at Dean, just forward, his body moving on instinct, rage overriding control. Dean didn't step back. Sammy threw both arms out, hands pressing against their chests, his injured body between them. "Stop. Both of you, stop." Frank's breathing was hard, his face inches from Dean's over Sammy's shoulder. Dean stared back, unflinching. "Get out of my way, Sam," Frank said quietly. "No. Sam. No. You want to hit him, you'll have to go through me. And I'm already beat up enough for 1 week. So how about we all just calm down?" The absurdity of it broke through. Frank blinked, looked down at Sammy, still swollen, still bruised, literally putting his body between his 2 best friends to stop them from hurting each other. Frank stepped back. Sammy lowered his arms but stayed between them, watching both carefully. "I'm still angry," Frank said. "I know," Dean replied. "You should have told me. Couldn't. Wouldn't. Same thing." Frank's laugh was bitter. "You're going to use my own words against me. You taught me well." They stared at each other. 2 men who'd built a friendship on loyalty and music, and shared bottles of Jack Daniels, now facing the gap that opens up when one friend makes a choice the other can't forgive. Finally, Frank said, "If it happens again." "It won't. If it does, you tell me." Immediately. No matter what, I get to make my own choices about my own life. Dean nodded slowly. Deal. I mean it, Dean. Next time I'm in the room. Understood. Frank looked at Sammy. You okay? I'm fine, Frank. If you remember who they were. I don't. Sammy's voice was firm. It happened fast. I didn't see faces clearly. And honestly, I just want to forget it and move on. Frank knew that was a lie too, but this time he let it go. He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the handle. I would have taken the prison time, you know. For Sam, for any of you. That's what friends do. Dean's voice was quiet. And friends stop friends from making sacrifices they can't take back. Frank didn't answer. He just left. Sammy sank onto the couch, exhausted. Well, that went better than expected. He's still pissed. He'll get over it. Will he? Sammy looked at Dean. Really looked at him. You knew this would happen. When you made the choice to not tell him, you knew he'd find out eventually, and he'd be furious. Yeah, and you did it anyway. Yeah, why? Dean poured 2 drinks, handed one to Sammy. Because 90 seconds wasn't enough time to do it right. I had to choose, get you out safe and deal with Frank's anger later, or bring Frank in and watch him destroy his life. That's not a hard choice, Sam. Not for me. Sammy raised his glass. To terrible choices that turn out right. Dean clinked his glass against Sammy's. To friendship that survives them. They drank. Outside Vegas sparkled under the desert stars, neon lights promising easy money and easier morals. A city built on the idea that consequences were for other people in other places. But in that dressing room, 2 men sat with the weight of a choice that couldn't be undone. A friendship tested, and the knowledge that sometimes the right thing to do pisses off everyone involved. Frank didn't speak to Dean for 2 weeks. Then one night, Dean was performing at the Sands, and Frank walked on stage unannounced, grabbed a microphone, and started harmonizing on The Lady is a Tramp. No explanation, no apology, just Frank being Frank and deciding the silent treatment was over. After the show, backstage, Frank put a hand on Dean's shoulder. Still mad at you. I know. Probably always will be. A little bit. I can live with that. Good. Because next time something happens to one of us, I'm going to be there, and you're going to let me. Dean nodded. Fair enough. Even if I make a stupid choice, especially then. Frank smiled. Just a little. You're a pain in the ass, Martin. Takes one to know one. Sinatra. They shook hands. And if the grip was a little tighter than necessary, if there was still an edge of anger in Frank's eyes and guilt in Dean's, well, that was friendship too. The messy, complicated kind that didn't fit in songs or movies. The kind that survived lies and fights and impossible choices made in storage rooms, while one friend sang and another bled, and a third tried to save them both. If you enjoyed spending this time here, I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing. A simple like also helps more than you'd think. Years later, in an interview, someone asked Frank about the biggest fight he'd ever had with Dean Martin. Frank's answer was immediate. Dean lied to me once, to protect me. And I hated him for it for about a month. What changed? I realized he was right, which made me hate him even more. Frank grinned. But that's Dean. He'll do the right thing even if you never forgive him for it. That's why he's my friend. If you want to hear about what happened when Dean finally told Frank who had sent those 3 men and what Frank did about it, tell me in the comments.